Mr. Todd Evans, who goes by Mac. And he's a civilian simulator instructor in the 558th Flying Training Squadron. Turns out that Max was a student of mine back in the 20th century when he went through pilot instructor training in the 560th. And I gave him a good overall, as I recall. Turned about as fair play because he recently had to deal with an ancient aviator who had to be told, "This is an aileron." So, thank you, Max. I look forward to hearing what you have to say tonight.
I'll try my best.
All right. I'll try my best to get your slides up.
For those of you I haven't met, Todd Evans, I go by Max. I'm one of many civilian sim instructors in the 558 Flying Training Squadron, and our primary job over in the 558 is to train new, what you may refer to as drone pilots. We refer to as remotely piloted aircraft pilots, RPA pilots. In fact, if you get around an RPA pilot and you call him a drone pilot, I can't be responsible for the response you might get, but it's not their favorite term. I'm here on behalf of Lieutenant Colonel Craig Dearden and Lieutenant Colonel Shiva Trimble. And Shiva was going to do this briefing, and no kidding, about 10 minutes before dinner started, his wife, her truck broke down north of San Antonio. So he's on a rescue mission for her, and then he looked over at me and goes, "You got it." So I'm going to walk through some slides that I didn't put together, I don't know, so bear with me. But it might simplify things because I'm a pretty simple guy. He wanted to give a little background on the squadron. Again, 558 Flying Training Squadron. Funny thing is, a little bit of background on me. How many of you went to Williams Air Force Base for pilot training? Old Willie grads. That's where I started. I'm originally from Oregon. Went to Arizona, pilot training at Willie. Stayed there as a T-38 instructor, a T-38 fake. Went on, got a chance to go from this little thing that you sit about maybe, this high off the ground to flying C-5s, 3 stories off the ground, and then finished that, and then came back to Randolph to fly tweets, sitting about this far off the ground. Did a couple staff tours, school, but bottom line, I finished my tour flying T-6s here as a pit instructor at Randolph and retired in 2008. Was lucky enough to pick up a civilian job up at staff, and I say that very sarcastically because after 10 years that turned out not to be a good thing, and I wanted to get back into instructing young people. They're just infectious, and so sure enough, talked to a couple old buddies, and they said, "Hey, we got some openings down in the 558th, and I've been there for about the last 6 years. When I first came back in to learn to fly the T6, they had stood up a squadron in short time, which was the 558, the Phantom Knights. They subsequently then, when the T-37 was retired, they moved over to the 559th, retired from that, and then 10 years later, here I am back with the 558th, which they restood that squadron up to train RPA pilots. And that was about 2011, if I'm not mistaken, where remotely piloted aircraft kind of came to fruition, if you will. And I think, if you don't mind me touching one here, a lot of people might think that this is what we're talking about. I'm going to show you here in a second. I'm talking about aircraft with the wingspan of a 737 that are being controlled in what might be Las Vegas, flying missions in Africa or Europe. It's quite the process, quite the program. When they first stood up the cadre, it was all manned aviators, manned aircraft, pilot wings. And then they realized, hey, this up and coming capability, we need a pipeline for it. And that's when they stood up the 558 back in 2011. Again, I believe is when they stood up the what we call RIQ, or RPA, the RPA schoolhouse here at Randolph Air Force Base. Next slide. Hap Arnold, he might have been clairvoyant. Slide. Again, a little bit of background. I came into the picture. He doesn't have the T6 on here, unless it's in the next slide. But I came in the picture kind of late. There we go. But long history in the 558, and I apologize I don't have more to offer on the wonderful history of the squadron. Give you an idea of what I know as the current inventory of remotely piloted aircraft. I am very confident that there are aircraft out there that you and I don't know about. They are gaining capability very rapidly. What is now the MQ-9, kind of the workhorse, is growing old already. Give you an idea, the RQ-4 Global Hawk, primarily for ISR, the RQ-170 says primarily ISR. I believe it has other capabilities, but the one you probably see in the news the most is the MQ-9, the Reaper, which is can reach out and touch somebody, and has on occasion. To give you an idea of the size, there's our Boeing 747. There's the RQ-4 Global Hawk sitting on a ramp next to a Boeing 737. This aircraft can depart from CONUS and fly its missions overseas and return on a single mission. The MQ-9 that's flying overseas is launching from overseas with a local crew. Once it's airborne, they pass on control to the primary crew, which is in a ground control station. I'll show you a picture here in a minute. And that GCS, or ground control station based crew, could be located in Las Vegas or many other places, CONUS here that I'll show you. Slide. We not only train the RPA pilots, but what you'll see in the ground control station is a pilot and a sensor operator. And so this schoolhouse here in the 558 trains both of those positions, and they start out in separate programs, and then the second half of the program they bring them together and they train as a crew. Realize that, and I'll talk more about the program that I'm involved in with the RPA pilots, but when they leave Randolph, just as Huck was talking about, when a pilot leaves pilot training, he goes on to some advanced training before he even gets to his or her primary weapon system, F-16 or what it might be. Same type of program here. It's a very generic based program to give them the general skills, and then they will be, once they get their assignment, and funny thing is, just like pilot training, if you all remember assignment night, they have assignment night. It's pretty fun, exciting place to be. And they then know where they're going, and they will go to a follow-on training, an FTU, to get the basics of their airframe before they then go to their final operating base. And again, I'll show you the map here in a minute. But the program itself, and you'll see it in comparison to UPT here momentarily, but we have an RPA instrument course, and that's where I come in. I have 0 hours flying a remotely piloted aircraft. I was an instructor of manned pilots, manned aircrew, for most of my career. And that's what I bring to the table, because what we do with the young lieutenants, and it's mostly lieutenants, some captains, is just like pilot training. They're selected from sessions, the academy, ROTC, OTS, and they get selected to be an RPA pilot. They will go to Colorado for a short period of time and actually hop in an aircraft, a Diamond DA, I believe it's a DA-20, it might be on the slide here. They get soloed in that aircraft before they come to Randolph and then they'll spend the next several weeks in what we call the RIC, used to be RIQ, now RIC, but it's a course that me and my fellow instructors, we give these RPA pilots all the skills that they would need to fly and control that RPA aircraft, that remotely piloted aircraft, in the national airspace. The thought being, if you were to look out your Boeing, your Southwest Airlines window and look over and see a RQ-4 or an MQ-9, which you probably won't at this stage, but in the future you might, but if you saw them, you could have confidence in knowing that the person controlling that aircraft has the qualifications and knows all the rules of the road to fly in the same airspace as all the general aviation aircraft. I don't know if that makes sense or not. Now I'll let you ask questions a little bit later. But that's the first part for the RPA pilots. Here is when we talked about, it used to be a BSOC course, was a basic sensor operator course. They've now just, I mean, no kidding, they've stood up the first class of what they call the multi-domain operations aviator course. And what they've done is the Air Force is determined that these sensor operators, we're going to bring them to a schoolhouse that'll give them the general skills for not just flying and managing an RPA aircraft, but all the other ISR aircraft in the inventory. So they kind of centralized sensor operator training at Randolph. But at a point, we match up the RPA sensor operator with the RPA pilot, and then they go through the last part of the training together and work as a crew. And it'll make more sense when I show you a picture here in a minute. Slide. Fighter pilot training. Huck can speak to this if it's way out of line, but several years before you be a fully qualified flight lead, to include pilot training, obviously. Same type of thing in other airframes, in manned aircraft. RPA pilot training pipeline to include the course they go through here and then their follow-on training. When they get to their unit, their final unit, which could be within a year, that very next day, and I'm being a little bit aggressive, but within short order, within just over a year, they could be flying an aircraft in theater, managing the mission, whether in a combat role or an ISR role. They are the aircraft commander. It's quite the training. Granted, it's a little bit different. It's not they're not taking off, shooting bad guys, coming back and landing. Granted, they are hopping in the GCS, flying the mission, shooting bad guys, and then hopping out and going home. They haven't left the ground at all, but they're having the skills to make those decisions on when to pull the trigger and how to employ their weapon system. Slide. This gives you an idea of the locations of airframes, or at least the squadrons in the CONUS. This includes the squadrons for the other ISR aircraft, where sensor operators go. But what you'll notice is that we've got RPA aircrew managing missions from everywhere from Hurlburt to Beale to Syracuse. Kaneohe, the Marine Corps. By the way, Marines come to our Air Force course. That's where the Marine Corps sends their RPA pilots. Slide. The training that I provide in for RIC, that instrument qual course, is a mock-up very similar to the T6 aircraft trainer that a UPT student would fly. This is the next iteration of that. The sim that we fly right now is in a half dome, if you will. The visibility is from wingtip to wingtip and straight up. And if they roll it inverted, they could they could see the ground. Pretty good system. Again, the primary purpose for them to understand how to fly the aircraft in instrument conditions in the national airspace, mixing it up with you all when you're on your United flight. This is a mock-up that, or pictures of what we have when we bring the pilot and the sensor operator together. It's a mock-up of the ground control station. I think there's another slide in here, so slide. Wow. So, my boss he's adding some slides for me. If you weren't aware, for all of us old folk, I'm with you. When we went through, there was no discussion about, hey, you got to stay in shape. Well, there might have been a little bit. You got to eat right. You got to get the right amount of sleep. Alien, quit partying. You know, those type of things. If you weren't aware, just like, and you could really, I think, in my mind, compare it to a professional sports organization. We have the Air Force, and I believe it's with every flying squadron, we have a contract called CRAFT, which brings in PhD specialists, not only in physical, nutritional, psychological to an extent, educators and trainers to help make all of our young aviators better. So I just want you to know that we're putting a lot of time and effort into it, and it's really paying off. When they're nice, they let me go to the gym once in a while, but it's really meant for the active duty. Slide. I think that might be it. The slide. Is that it?
Barely.
Yeah, so he didn't show, I was hoping he would have had a picture of the ground control station, and I apologize. You know the Connex boxes that you see on the ships delivering all your goods? Picture one of those, and you would open the door, and inside of it would be a what we call a ground control station, and it would be two seats against, right next to one another, multiple screens. On the pilot's side, he actually has a stick and a throttle and everything he would need to control the aircraft. On the other side, to his right, would be the sensor operator who was controlling all the cameras and the other sensors on the aircraft. And then they can work in tandem to either, again, fly the ISR mission, intel, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or a combat mission, blowing things up, shooting bad guys. That said, I hope that was helpful. But I open up to any questions.
How do you see AI influencing the RPA training in the future?
So this may not go down the path you were thinking, and this is going to be applicable to all of Air Force training, but I think it's going to be helpful in, again, from a training perspective. One of the things that we're able to do with our simulator is link them up. We can actually get 5 to 7 of the simulators linked together, and if I'm sitting in one simulator and I look out to my left, I can see my 5 classmates in their aircraft, and we can take off and we can see each other during the flight, and we can interact. And it's really great training because now it's just not this kind of blueprint, black and white, everything happens in succession. You put 5, 6, 7 aircraft together and you don't know what's going to happen. Everyone's making different requests for different things. Well, that eats up a lot of resources in instructors, because we got to have an instructor with each student, and then we have to have an instructor who plays the controller. He's the approach controller, given vectors and clearances and whatnot. Well, AI is giving us the capability, which I think we'll see real soon. AI can take part of that role, especially as the controller, and actually analyze all these aircraft and actually deconflict them, approve them for different clearances. Even if you were a single ship, a solo aircraft, you can use this AI capability to create an environment that the AI is controlling. So I may not actually have the sims linked up, I may just have the one sim, but on my screen looking out, I can see other multiple aircraft doing their thing, and it's all controlled by AI. Any other questions? Again, thank you all, appreciate it.
Thanks, Max.